So I'm Miss Garner. I am the assistant principal at River Valley High School. I'm using that name because I do not want to break confidentiality. Also, I'm going to give you a spiel on why I actually picked this particular topic. My topic, as you can see, is the impact of trauma-informed practices on student achievement. As an assistant principal at River Valley High School, I have noticed an influx of behavior referrals, disciplinary referrals, and when I get those students into my office, I've noticed that a lot of it is not behavior, it's actually trauma. And so what I've noticed with my teachers is that we do not know the difference between what trauma looks like and what behavior looks like. So one of the findings that I'm going to go over is how to identify that and what the misconceptions can be. So my problem of practice started off with just trauma significantly impacts the learning, not just behavior. It also impacts the engagement in the classroom. So what I did was I went inside of classrooms of these teachers. I observed for an extended time, and I noticed that if those practices are not in place, then we do have a lot of disengagement. We had a lot of teachers or students that showed that they were not impacted in the learning process at all because of the disengagement. And there was an increase of those referrals from that particular teacher. The current implementation of trauma-informed practices is inconsistent across classrooms. So what I have noticed is that, yes, it may go on in the math department, but it's not as prevalent in the English department or in other areas throughout the school. And I'm just using those as an example. So what I have noticed that if it's not consistent in each classroom, then it breaks that train of thought for that particular student. Because if they're getting it in a math classroom and not in an English classroom, then it's like, that's when the behavior issues start over again. Students experience widely different expectations based on their schedule. So depending on exactly what classroom they're in, then those expectations was not cohesive. So that is this behavior or is it a trauma response is what we're going to dive into today. School improvement, inconsistent implementation creates achievement gaps. It increased disciplinary incidents and limits overall school success metrics. So understanding trauma. If I ask you right now, what is trauma? What would you say? Do I have a volunteer?
I would say that trauma is something emotionally damaging or physically damaging has happened to you in the past that you can't put out of your mind or you just can't get past. Like it's something that stays with you, that would be trauma. And obviously trauma is a negative word, so it would be something that's on the negative side, and they just can't get past it, and it impacts every part of their life.
So how would you distinguish between a child that is demonstrating a behavior problem versus a trauma problem?
I think you got to know your student. You got to know a little bit about their background, ask some questions before you just automatically assume that what they're doing is because they're just a terrible kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like really dive into what's going on with them and figure it out. Maybe it is this that they're just acting silly, but it could be trauma related.
Okay. Anybody else have anything else to add?
You can also pay attention to how they are changing. Like if they start off one way and then all of a sudden you start noticing negative behaviors, getting to know that student and finding out what is causing these behaviors now that wasn't happening before.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I want to dive into this. Trauma impacts how students think, behave, and regulate emotions. Will we agree? And it often appears as defiance, disengagement, or low effort. So I can say in this role as an assistant principal, I have gotten referrals based off defiance, off disengagement, and low effort. So I just got a call the other day talking about the student didn't want to participate, but there was no groundwork that was covered by the actual individual teacher on why the student didn't want to engage in that particular assignment. So we have to ask ourselves, it has to be a healthy balance between, is this a behavior issue or is this something that's going on inside of this child that's limiting them? Because as we all know, based off research, is that if a child basic needs are not met, then we are not going to be able to even get them to the learning process. And so I understand a lot of teachers that I did talk to was like, well, I'm not a therapist. Well, I didn't go to school to figure out about trauma. But to be completely honest, this is just the generation that we have in front of us, the group of kids that we have, and they're coming to us with all of this particular trauma inside of them. So if it's in my mind right now, I'm going to do something with you guys if you are a red or a yellow or a green, right? So if I'm in a green zone, I'm good to go because I can learn, right? That means that everything is going steady in my world. I'm not thinking about external things while I'm still in the classroom trying to figure out what you're telling me. It could be a great lesson that particular day, but just because I'm filled with things that's happening to me mentally and emotionally, I'm going to shut down. And we also have to get to a point to understand that compliance doesn't mean that a person is actually learning. Because I have a son who is a very bright young child, but at the end of the day, just because he's being compliant doesn't mean that he learned anything. Prime example, I asked him, he made 100 on an exam, and I said, well, can you tell me about how you got to this particular one? He was like, I don't know, I just followed what the teacher told me to do, right? So we have to also keep that in mind. It often appears, it's a biological response, not always intentional behavior. So not all behavior is willful. Some of it is a response to stress or past experiences. And that's what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis because these are young adults that we're having to send out into the world after this particular space. All right, trauma. So my math teacher gave me, I can't say your name. So my math teacher gave me a great example of what trauma is. So trauma is ongoing stress from past, current experiences. Sometimes that dictates how students think and feel, affecting learning and focus. What trauma is not. It's not always visible or obvious. So that goes back to one of my other math teachers who said that you have to build those relationships at the beginning of the year so that you can figure out when something is off with the person, okay? Limited to extreme headline events, always intentional misbehavior. So a lot of times when a child is dealing with trauma, it's not just that they're misbehaving, but that's exactly what they have been defined as. Like this child is just acting out. So how trauma manifests in students. It could be inconsistent behavior. It could be executive dysfunctions. It could be regulation struggles or relational barriers. There's a lot of students that come in with a significant lack of trust for adults. And that stems from their home life, right? I had a student that broke down in my office that was a male student the other day because of the fact that his mom kicked him out. And so he was just triggered by my presence because I'm having a conversation and this assistant principal was actually in there with us. And so he was like, I just get triggered when someone's voice gets louder. And so we have to be very conscious of how we're talking and how to actually de-escalate situations without traumatizing them even more. Does that make sense? So these behaviors are often misinterpreted as defiance when they may just be a stress response. Because as an adult, how do you respond to stress?
Not great. And like there are times when, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
I mean, honestly, there are times when I'm like super, super busy and like stuff happens and I'm just not great. Like my attitude can be terrible sometimes, and I'm an adult who's been regulating for 52 years.
Right.
But I can see where like with the kids, that's not always, they can't regulate. And then if they have trauma in their background too, that's,
Yeah.
makes it even more.
And I think like the way I regulate it, it may show up as a poor behavior in a student because like you mentioned low effort before, I'll just unplug. it's like I'm over it. I'm not going to deal with it. So in a way to regulate myself, but I can see how that can manifest and how they would look if a student did it. If they unplug, and then it's like, oh, they're not trying. Yeah, I just unplugged.
Anyone else? So at our age compared to the ages that we are educating right now, do you think that they have those tools to be able to regulate themselves? And so how do we give them those tools so that they can be successful and we still get the outcome that we're trying to get?
Everything's a learning moment. You teach them, and I also model
Mm-hmm.
for them as well, because sometimes we as teachers get frustrated when we see a child's frustrated, but I don't think that's teaching them how to cope if we're doing the same thing they're doing. So a lot of times, sometimes you have to talk to them, tell them how to manage and show them how to manage.
Yes.
And that goes even with how you're dealing with them. Like, you're not getting frustrated with them, you're not just putting them out, you're not just giving up on them. Then they'll see, like, hey, okay, this is how I need to behave. So sometimes you just gotta teach. Everything's a teaching moment to me.
Yes. And I think that that's excellent. Like, it starts with us, like modeling those things. Someone get the, I'm sorry. It starts with us, like modeling in real time, like how it is. And I like to tell, I'm very transparent. Like some of my colleagues would tell you, like I tell kids all the time and I try to give them real life examples. So a student was walking with me down the hallway. I said, yes, we do have to learn how to deal with difficult people. There are people that I have to work with that sometimes are difficult, not in a negative way, but it's just like you have to learn how to cope with different situations. It can't always be I'm gonna just shut down or I'm just not going to respond. But at their age, they don't have those conversations. So it could just be a conversation that I'm having with them, how I deal with it so that they could take that tool out of my bucket into theirs. So this was one of the things that I really loved. A misconception that came up a lot was that building these particular or having trauma practices in the classroom was just, it's a greeting to students. That's not it. It's not also just building relationships. That's a part of it. And it's not just being kind or soft, right? So what it is, it requires structure and routines, and it uses co-regulation strategies, and it must be building wide, right? So it can't just happen in your classroom, but not that person's classroom or here or there. Can't be hit or miss. It has to be consistent. So what else it looks like is inconsistency. It also looks like outbursts, and it also looks like a lack of trust. So let's define what trauma practices are. It's an intentional strategy used to create safe, predictable, and supportive learning environments that help students regulate emotions and engage in learning. So we need predictable routines, right? We also need clear expectations. So I know a lot of teachers like to ask, well, why do I have to have an agenda board, right? Because I have a son that is on the spectrum, and if he comes into your classroom, although he's very bright, he's going to become a disruption in your class because he doesn't have any guidance to know exactly what to do. It's like if you showed up at this PD today and I didn't give you any kind of instructions, you just came in here, you have no idea what's going on, I'm going to lose you. So you have to gain their attention in the first 60 seconds. You have to teach co-regulation strategies. This is not something that's just constant, right? Like we have to learn this even as an adult. Emotional check-ins are very, very, very important. Because one of the things that I did hear over and over from the state audit is that y'all love the way we did wellness check-ins with you as an adult. So do you think that our students will like that as well? So structured environments, transition cues, and students' choice and voice. All right. So can somebody tell me why the student choice and voice would be very important to implement in these practices? Yes.
Develops ownership in the classroom for the students. So
Okay.
they're invested in it when they feel like their voice is being heard. When they have choices on assignments or on certain learning strategies that they may like more than others, and they pick those, then they're more invested and engaged in it because they chose it. It was their choice. It wasn't dictated to them. It was their pick. Their
Yeah.
option. So,
I agree. So, how to predictable routines, right? Anxiety decreases, co-regulation, it helps them to manage their stress, right? So this has to become a daily thing that we're incorporating, not just educationally, but also we have to think about the whole child. So at this particular school, we have 1,224 students, 646 males. We also have 578 females. The percentage of our African American was 80. Multi-ethnicities, we had 8.5, special education 196. English learners was 80 and homeless was 21. So based off of the demographics, do you think that these particular students are coming with us with trauma? Right? So this is a diverse Title I school with significant social, emotional, and academic needs, making trauma-informed practices essential for our student success. These were my research questions. How do trauma-informed practices influence student engagement? How do trauma-informed practices impact academic achievement? And how do teachers perceive the effectiveness of trauma-informed practices? To what extent are trauma-informed practices consistently implemented? The review of my research, I did neuroscience. Chronic stress activates the survival responses, inhibiting the prefrontal cortex. Attachment, relational trust serves as a primary protective factor. And the literature gap for me was surprising because when I was researching this, it's not a lot of information on trauma-informed practices for high school. Like there's a lot for elementary and middle, but not for high school. So methods and designs, this was a qualitative action research focused on improving local practices, which was at River Valley High School, supported by descriptive surveys. So I provided Google Forms. I sent those out to certain people. They gave me feedback, and then I observed those classrooms. My role was collecting the data, of course, the research purposes, not formal evaluations, and I made sure that every person who was a part of this actually knew that. I focus on systems, observations, analyze patterns, not individual teaching performances. Selection that I did was, of course, the teacher surveys, the observations, and then I made sure I use a triangulation because I wanted to make sure that my research wasn't just based off one source. So here are the findings. Staff awareness. We have a high percentage. Everybody knows exactly what trauma-informed practices are. It was 92%. The positive perception was 88% that they agreed that we need them. And then 95% was basically focusing on relationships. So this is where we had some gaps. So the finding revealed that teachers showed strong awareness and positive perceptions of trauma-informed practices. The inconsistencies was the implementation of co-regulation, predictable routines, and structured supports was inconsistent building-wide. My observations insight, the implementation varied significantly between classrooms. Like I said, depending on which department I went in, I seen something totally different. A gap exists between teacher perception and actual classroom practice. So that's something that we have to fix. The key insights. Teachers' understanding does not automatically lead to consistent classroom practices. Awareness is the floor, but consistency is the bridge. So when you see that, what jumps out at you?
Just because a teacher understands does not mean they know how to implement it
Yes.
in the classroom.
Right. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay. The conclusion, relationships are strong. I did see a cultural buy-in there. Systems are inconsistent. So technically, we need to, as an entire school, River Valley, that is, make sure that we are implementing this across the board, not just in some spaces. The solution, we must move towards a structured implementation. All right, so that means a school-wide plan. Implementations for RVHS, systematic shifts, move from individual effort to building systems, embedded into MTSS and PBIS. So those things need to be supported. Then support providing coaching and PD and ensure building consistency. The different phases that I would love to see is a shared language, because at the beginning I asked you guys what trauma was, and I'm sure if everybody shared it would have something different. So we have to make sure that that's a shared language within River Valley High School. Phase 2, focus on co-regulation and technical training. The third phase would be instructional coaching and peer modeling cycles. So for those that are doing it, I would love to see them partner up with people that are not, so that we can make it consistent. And then, of course, the last phase is a full MTSS PBIS systematic alignment. For future research, I would love to see how, and when I say TI, I'm just talking about trauma-informed practices, will actually have a bearing on student graduation rates. I would love to research that. The differences in implementation across content areas, core versus electives, and then explore the adult capacity. You know, is it just because it's a skill, or it's just a deficit at this point? So are teachers inconsistent because they lack skills, or because they're overwhelmed?
I think it can be skills, honestly. Sometimes I think we get overwhelmed, but if you're trying to help a kid out, I don't know that being overwhelmed is ever a good excuse.
Yeah.
So I think, our job is to help them access the curriculum the best we can, and if they're coming to us with problems, we need to address those too.
Okay.
And if we're not good at that, figure out how we can get better at it.
Anybody else?
I think it would be because they lack the skills. Because there are certain skills that can assist in not allowing you to be overwhelmed. So I really think it has more to do with the skills, and not necessarily the teaching skills, but it's like, if we're talking about the trauma-informed practices, I think it's probably more so the trauma-informed practices,
Okay.
but more so the skill.
Okay.
We also use that word trauma sometimes in a way, like, I hear the word math trauma all the time, and it actually kind of bothers me a little bit, because I don't feel like it can be traumatizing to sit through a math class that you're struggling in, but I think true trauma comes from those emotional, physical things that happen to you, along the way, and I just don't like that we use the word to describe difficulty sometimes, because it kind of downplays the word trauma.
Yeah.
And I think what you said is not really even the math. I think there are things that they experienced before that math class that actually causes the anxiety that they have in the class, but it just manifests in the math class. And I think that can be, said across the board, because a lot of students say, I don't like school. Okay, so why don't you like school? Is it because you're hungry until 11, or your parents can't afford to buy you the clothes that everyone thinks cool? And so I don't think, like you said, I like that. It's not necessarily the particular class, but I think it's the things, the potential trauma that they experienced before the class that, just actually manifest.
I like that.
Or like you said, a trigger. And, some of the things may trigger.
Yeah. So this was my reference. These were my references. And from here, guys, we have to build the awareness so that we can see this in action in real time. We don't have a knowledge problem. We have a consistency problem, right? And so me personally think that a lot of it is just, I don't want to. Because there's so much research out there that's available to you to be able to reduce some of the things that I'm seeing on a constant basis. But I thank you so much. If you have any questions at this time, please ask.
Was there any one thing that guided you into picking trauma?
Yes, it was. So I actually experienced trauma in my own high school career. I was bullied. It was a lot of different things that went on in my personal life that I also saw the correlation between like when I got disciplinary referrals as an assistant principal and also just kids not knowing exactly how to just regulate themselves. And so a part of my practice is not just giving them like a consequence because that's not going to correct the behavior. It's more so trying to educate them on why you're in trouble and then how can we prevent this from happening. But that's a good question. So if you will, at this time, just scan that QR code and answer those few questions for me. You don't have to like put your name or anything on it, but I just need it for my professor. Thank you guys. I love you a bunch.